What up, Hyperchange? Welcome to another episode. Do live stream today. I want to talk about Spotify. I'm so pumped about Spotify. Have been making a ton of videos about them. I personally put on a pretty big trade after the Joe Rogan Experience deal came out of my options retirement. In Boston 2022 Spotify options and long the stock. So really pumped about that. Wanted to give you all of my thoughts with the recent news. Once again, not financial advice. I'd never want to give financial advice. Do not recommend following what I'm doing. I'm just open sourcing my ideas. If you can hear me, give me a thumbs up on the audio. That would be awesome. And then we can get started on. Can you hear me? All right. I'm just going to go into it. So Spotify stock is up like 14% now on the news of both Warner Bros, DC Comics, and Marvel launching a scripted podcast, as well as Spotify signing a deal with Kim Kardashian, which is totally wild and totally took me by surprise. So in the past like month or so, and actually even beyond that, they've made 4 really key exclusive podcast deals. So Spotify, the audio music platform, really pushing into the podcasting space to become this more than music, really just everything audio. And I think even bigger than that, I think is actually their push into video content. And this is why I wanted to make this video. I think a lot of people don't understand how big of an impact Spotify moving into the video space will be competing with YouTube. Sorry that this is laggy for you guys. I'm doing my best here. I'm just going to keep going. But anyway, so Spotify signs Joe Rogan. How much do they pay for Joe Rogan? So I've been pulling up some data. I want to do a full episode on this. But Joe Rogan experience alone is getting on by my track in Q1 2020 over 1 billion impressions. That is a combination of YouTube views and Spotify list like downloads of the podcast. Literally 1 billion views per quarter. I mean, this would put it up with some of the biggest media companies in the world, and they've signed Joe Rogan to actually go exclusive on their platform, which means that the only place you're going to get the full episode of Joe Rogan is on Spotify. So that's 1 billion impressions a month. I think he's like the bro Oprah. I personally love Joe Rogan, and when I saw them make this deal, I was like, wow, they're big, they're ambitious, they're willing to make the moves and sign these creators. And even if they did pay Joe Rogan $500 million, $100 million a year, I think this is a brilliant move. It'll add billions of dollars of market capitalization. Joe Rogan was underpriced despite how much they paid him. And what was brilliant is if you look at what his comedian friends are saying, what other people in the industry are saying, they're like, this was a great deal. Like Spotify all seen as an alternative. YouTube censoring them. Like all the other comedians that are Joe Rogan's friends are like, think Spotify's awesome. So to do this deal where, okay, maybe Joe Rogan's sold out, you can say what you want, but the creators love it. Creators feel like they have another option besides YouTube. And I think this was a huge win for Spotify from a brand perspective in the eyes of all these comedians and creators. And so genius move there. Then they lock up Kim Kardashian. Actually, first I want to get to the Joe Rogan thing, because what's the big deal about that is I actually love watching Joe Rogan, even though it's a podcast, and I think most people do as well. And so Joe Rogan, his video is going on Spotify. This is what I think people just cannot miss. So if Joe Rogan's exclusive video is on Spotify, Spotify just became a video platform. They already have the app, it's already the app on my home screen on my phone that I love. Then it's going to go on Apple TV. It's going to be everywhere. And it's not just going to be audio, but it's going to be a video platform as well. And so when you talk about monetizing with video ads, engagement, I mean, this puts Spotify in a whole different stratosphere. Their subscriber base is not that much smaller than Netflix overall for premium subscribers, yet their market cap is like 1/5 or 1/6, and they're growing way faster. So I think Spotify is in a game-changing position to not only reinvent the music industry, which they've been doing, but move into this podcasting game with original content, which is just going to drive more and more subscribers, and I think kind of have a halo effect and really make them kind of be a monopoly and run away with the table of this audio platform. So the other news that came out today was Kim Kardashian. I mean, Kim Kardashian, we all know, keeping up with the Kardashians, like probably the world's biggest celebrity, honestly. And she is doing an exclusive podcast on Spotify about, I think, like legal justice or something like that. Sounds like actually a really cool concept. And her work is trying to become a lawyer. But that's another exclusive podcast of like, okay, we got Joe Rogan and Kim Kardashian, totally different audiences, but huge, the ability to drive massive amounts of subscribers and traction on the platform. So I just think, Spotify's growing at 30%. They're crushing it with revenue. They're underpriced from a price sales, from a price gross profit basis. And then now you have literally the next 6 months where I think we're going to rapidly increase the amount of subscriber growth rate because of these huge new acquisitions. So I personally am super bullish. I think Spotify is about to get re-rated from like, okay, okay, this Swedish kind of music streaming company, who cares? Is this another Pandora? To wait, all of a sudden, this is a YouTube Netflix competitor with 150 million premium users growing at 30%. This should be valued at 100 billion at least. And implying a $400 to $500 stock price in the next year to 18 months. That's kind of my philosophy. So that's why I position myself to get long the stock, to get long calls, which has been awesome. And so the other big news that I wanted to talk about, so I think the video thing is huge. And the other big thing that Spotify acquired about a little, I think it was a couple months ago, was The Ringer. So The Ringer is like a sports podcast or sports kind of broadcast network. And this to me is really interesting. Or sorry, the light keeps doing that. I'm trying to make it a little better. But The Ringer, this podcast that they acquired, Daniel Ek, when they made it on the conference call, said, I think we just bought the next ESPN. Do you really think the next ESPN is not going to be video? I mean, I think there's a huge potential for Spotify to start really dabbling with video. And it seems like the content they're making is ripe for video. I think Kim Kardashian's podcast video, Joe Rogan's going to be video. You're going to have The Ringer, all these sports highlights with video as well, super complimentary. And on top of that, there's the news today that just came out, Marvel and Warner Bros. Exclusive scripted content. That really does sound more like audio, but at the same time, like, we're also working on more new original content coming to Spotify. So, the pace of innovation here for Spotify to sign these deals, for be willing to make these bold investments in Spotify and original and exclusive podcast content, I think is going to cement them as the leader of this space. They also have Anchor, which is a platform that I love, which I use to distribute the audio version of this show, which is on Spotify, of course. And that they say in their Q1 report, there are now more than 1 million podcasts available on our platform. More than 60% of them are powered by Anchor, which we acquired a year ago. In Q1 specifically, Anchor-powered shows accounted for 70% of new podcasts on our service. So they're not only moving into getting the biggest podcast, they're also making it super easy for the little guy to create his own podcast, people like myself. And then when you have all these little guys creating podcasts, you all of a sudden get all that back-end data on which podcasts are growing the fastest, which have the highest engagement, which are doing the best. You can make early deals to acquire them exclusively. This data arbitrage could be a massive advantage for them deciding which content to make original. I think Netflix or Spotify here is really making a push directly at Netflix. And so the stock price is pricing in all of these advancements. Maybe, but I don't know. I think Spotify is still trading at 36, 40 billion, 36, 38 billion, what they're going to do, like 8 billion in revenue this year. I don't know. I still think Spotify is trading at a much lower price sales multiple than Netflix, despite faster growth and despite a much longer runway for growth. So that's why I'm really, really pumped about what they're doing here. And so, yeah, let me see if you have any questions. Spotify's UI for podcasts, I think the reason why Spotify is excelling is because they are really focused. Apple is throwing so much money at its music stuff to try and be able to compete with Spotify, and just have not been able to do it. And I think Spotify's focus has really been winning them. And to parallel what they're doing in the music space, they're really giving creators data. Like when you talk to a creator in the music industry, an internet musician, what app are they checking every single day to see their stats, to see how much they're getting paid? Pretty much only Spotify. Spotify has built a really unique relationship there. And the way they put independent, creators on their back by putting them in these Discover playlists. Imagine if they do that for podcasts as well. What's the biggest problem with podcasts? Discovery. Nobody can find your dope podcast. Try searching for podcasts on Apple. Garbage. Even the podcasts you follow, you can barely find a new episode. It's a joke. What does Spotify crack the code on that Apple Music couldn't do? Discovery for independent musicians and creators, allowing them to find a new audience, allowing them to blow up while making the listeners happy because we found new content that we didn't have to work for. They're going to do that in podcasts as well. And so then you really start to see this vision for Spotify. And I think they're just going to be one of the most important digital platforms of the 21st century. Like owner, operator, founder Daniel Ek, super big vision. And this transition of podcasting, which I wasn't totally sold on, I think is now in the past 6 months has gone in the bag. They say in Q4 that they had about 16% of their users engaging with podcast content. That was up to 19% in Q1. In Q2, I think this will go up. We're going to rapidly see them 30, 40, 50% really boom in the podcasting space. The other thing they did is Shane and Heath, I was just playing around with this on my phone. They already have a video podcast, episodes 28, 29, and 30. This Shane and Heath, huge YouTubers who Spotify dabbled with to put video with in the podcast. Do you think that's a coincidence that they partner with YouTubers to make their first podcast video? And if you go back, looking at Spotify, they announced video in like 2015 or 2016. They've tried to dabble in music videos. Like, this is something that's really been on the agenda for Spotify for a long time. They've really been experimenting a lot with video. And I think the undercurrent of all of this big podcast news is actually not that Spotify is tripling down on podcasts and all this, but it's that they're going to do video as well. That's like the big thing that I feel like people just don't get. And especially with Joe Rogan, like, the fact that you're still gonna be able to get clips on YouTube, but the fact that his exclusive video is only gonna be on YouTube. I mean, think about the Elon Musk video that Joe Rogan did. This has like 30 million views. This is massive, evergreen, iconic content library that is just so valuable. It's like the Seinfeld of podcast libraries. And I think they got it for such a steal if they paid under $1 billion or like under 200 million a year, frankly. And so this to me is really, and I see a bunch of you asking me to do a Spotify video. I will do a more in-depth video, actually like analyzing the valuation of the stock, although I've already done that, to give you a little bit more in-depth about how I'm thinking about that. But this, I really want to trickle down and talk about the business. Another big sort of moonshot I want to make about Spotify is, this is actually, shout out to John, who I talked about this, and he was telling me his idea, and like this idea of like, why isn't music competitive? Oh, Travis, good. Props. Although I'm not telling, this is not financial advice. I don't want anyone to do what I do, so I want to keep that really, but this idea that music shouldn't just be audio only, like artists should want to bring you into their own world. Like, you should put on a VR headset when you listen to a song and experience it like a video content. This is where I think the music world's going, is music. We think of it as just audio now, but I think music is really selling you a world of emotions, a story, and allowing you to immerse yourself in that story with visuals, not just audio. I think is very powerful. People love music videos, but I think the music video today is only about 10% of where this is all going. A VR immersion is what the future of music will be. And I think that is what Spotify is owning now, and that's kind of why they're dabbling in video. They realize this. When you're Netflix, I'm hearing it and I'm watching it. To me, that's a lot more stimulating, and it's hard for Spotify audio only to compete unless it's like, oh, I'm walking somewhere, I can't watch it, or I'm driving, I can't watch it. It's always like the secondary consumption. I think if you could push music with more visual content, bring a VR world in, it could be that primary consumption. And then, the music platform becomes as worth much as a video platform. Yeah, so there are a lot of people working on VR content already, but I would say it really hasn't gone mainstream. What do I think about Disney? Not sure. I kind of want to keep talking about Spotify. Another big thing that I think this is going to drive, and I've seen a lot of people like, why would they pay so much for Joe Rogan and Kim Kardashian? Like, isn't this a slap in the face to all the musicians who aren't getting paid that much? What I've been hearing is actually Spotify's payout per stream has been increasing. Spotify's got their hands tied behind their back. If it's music, it's not directly on the Spotify platform. They have to go through TuneCore, all this back-end distribution. It's a mess. I want to make more content about this because it's not like I get to upload a video on YouTube, I just click upload. They can't really do that. They try to do this, but then it didn't really work. You basically have to go upload it to like some sort of distributor platform like TuneCore. They'll distribute it to Apple, Spotify, these other people. Because there's so many layers, you're not getting all of that money. Revenue per stream super low. For Spotify, they just don't have that money to pay out to musicians. But podcasts directly uploaded on their platform, video directly uploaded to their platform, way higher gross margin, way easier to monetize, way less middlemen. This is just going to make like gross dollars of profit per minute listened on the platform way higher for podcasting than for music. People don't want to accept that, which is, if they're a musician, but I think that's the huge reality. That's why they're paying so much for Joe Rogan. And I think Joe Rogan single-handedly could drive a couple million subscriptions and accelerate the growth. Ben, awesome question. What if Apple gets in a bidding war with Spotify? I think this is really interesting. I think, Spotify, I think Apple tried to sign Oprah, but Apple they just don't have the it factor. I don't know. And I think a lot of it comes down to execution, pace of innovation, seeing the vision of where this is all going. And Apple is going to go down as having really missed a massive boat here because they were the first to do the iTunes store, the first to do podcasts was like on the iPhone, podcast. And they somehow have missed it. It's super hard to discover podcast. The podcast app sucks, and they've totally dropped the ball on this. And I think Spotify has really taken that place and is going to make it easier to discover podcasts. And that's going to be, I think, a huge game changer for the entire way the podcast experience works, like similar to what they've done in music. So very bullish on that. Any more questions? feel like I've kind of explained everything here, but I mean, I'm really, really excited. I'm holding on to my Spotify calls for now, holding on to my stock as well. My stock's more long term, calls are more short term. But yeah, Ken, thanks for super or the chat there. I do think they're becoming a YouTube competitor, and I think as a creator myself, who had to say illness 19 in every video because I was getting demonetized for a while for saying COVID, I just think like it's so exciting to see that there's another company that is doing this and that finally said like screw it, like all these people like Joe Rogan and Kim Kardashian and The Ringer and Marvel, like they're crushing it. We can go get them. They are underpriced attention. So I think this is a huge win and validation of just the podcast business model, long form show content in general, of how much value there is in these type of shows, and they're extremely underpriced for the advertising revenue, and Spotify cares and they're focused. YouTube's not focused on audio. Apple's doing a million other things. Netflix isn't focused on audio. I think that focus is allowing them to move quicker, and is really becoming an edge. Trying to get me off topic here. Amazon buying Rivian. What about Amazon buying FUV? Very possible. I'm waiting to see what Amazon does in electric vehicles. I know they're going to make a big move. I think they're going to buy somewhere, build their own electric cars. Amazon's going to make a move here. We just don't know what it is yet. Any Spotify questions? Would love to answer those. Yeah, so I think a lot of people are like, whoa, the stock's up so much today. Why is it up so much now? What just happened? They signed Kim. I think a lot of what's happening now is people are realizing that these deals, Joe Rogan and Kim Kardashian, are like, these are going to be needle movers for actually getting a lot more people to sign up and accelerate this and really make them the leader. No, they haven't offered me a deal yet. I'm still waiting on that. I like the idea of Spotify on the Tesla. That's a no-brainer. I like the idea of them working with Logan Paul. I think he has one of the biggest podcasts in the world, Impulsive, controversial creator, but I think that's another person. But I think if Spotify, I'm really curious to see what they're going to do in video, because I'm not personally sold that they'll be able to pull it off. They haven't pulled it off yet, but they're clearly trying. And I think that is the question of if they can really become a video-esque platform. Like, will they only be video podcasts? Will they let anyone upload videos? Is it going to be more selective? I think this is kind of really up in the air, and how they do this video content in the app is very, very curious. But like, I think the Ringer thing, like just these comments by Daniel Ek, the CEO, where he says, like, we just bought it. I'm trying to find the quote right now. The acquisition of Ringer will bring highly loyal sports fans and sports and culture fans to the platform. Spotify CEO Daniel Ek said on the company's February 5th earnings call, the trend that we're investing in is radio is moving online, he said, apparently referencing Simmons' ESPN background. Ek added, what we really did with the Ringer, I think we bought the next ESPN. So is it only going to be radio? Or are they going to do video? Because I think sports is way better if you can actually watch the highlights, right? Like, that's going to make it 10 times better. And I think that's the kind of, analogy that I see for all sorts of different content. Barstool, that's a wild company. I think live content is something else on Spotify's platform that there's a huge potential for. I love doing live. I just did a live audio podcast on the channel a couple days ago. Huge fan of that. So I think Spotify is probably going to triple down there. I also think the ability for them to let you invest in your own artists is massive. Invest in artists you want to help them fund their next album, I think would be huge. And so I'm really bullish on like that potential. And I just see Daniel Ek as being on the creator side. I don't see any other company that is really on the creator side in the space. And that's why I think Spotify is winning. Spotify video could be another app. That's a really interesting idea. Dan, thanks. Simmons has talked about video and audio. Yeah, I mean, I got to agree here. I think there's a big PR or like Spotify investor day that's gonna come out, and what's gonna happen is that they're gonna be like, we are launching Spotify video, whether it's another app, whether it's a section in the app. This is the big announcement that people are like, it's out there, but nobody said it. And that's why I'm making this video. Joe Rogan signs the podcast. That's a big deal. Even bigger deal is Spotify is gonna have the video of Joe Rogan on the podcast. Like millions of people tune in every single week to see this dude's podcast on video. I mean, this is like, I think even if they paid $1 billion for 5 years, it probably would still be worth it for them. I don't think the subscription price needs to go up, although I do think over time Spotify does have a lot of pricing power. I mean, I pay $9 or $10 for my Spotify. Like, what is Spotify selling at its core? Happiness, escapism, relaxation. I think these are such important things for humanity and society to have. It makes me so happy every time I engage with the Spotify app. Like, I just think it's a very important piece of the economy. First episode on Spotify, Joe Rogan and Elon Musk, that would be epic. I actually do have a message for Spotify, which is that I heard on the Joe Rogan podcast, he's like, yo, like Spotify's already like, they're so awesome. He's talking great things about Spotify, but he's also like, well, they're trying to ask me who the next guests are. And I'm already like, oh, I gotta tell them who my guests are. Like, we're gonna do his thing, be the person who doesn't annoy creators. And this is so easy, just don't bug him. Yeah, so Spotify as a YouTube competitor would be way more ad revenue. Although what's interesting is Spotify has kind of downplayed the growth of their ad revenue and focused on premium revenue. So I really think the video is less about ad revenue, more about driving subscriptions for the overall platform. No, I did not watch the AI podcast with Spotify's chief product officer. That sounds like a good one. The fact that Spotify Premium is easy to get for free does not concern me. No. Who should Spotify acquire? I don't know. I think they're making genius moves right now. I mean, I was not expecting Kim Kardashian at all. Yeah, and I think we're gonna have to see how this plays out. But I think they're not gonna stop, and that's why I personally am pumped with Spotify. 'Cause I'm like, I don't know what's going on. I'm not really. I've been trying to get in touch with Spotify. I can't. But or like someone in their IR department or Daniel Ek, But I trust that they're making the right moves, because the second I saw them like kind of like take the bold risk to sign Joe Rogan, I was like, all right, these people are thinking these are thinking on the exact wavelength that I want to be thinking. They're bold, they're risk, they're doing the right moves to win. Yeah. So anyway, that wraps up my Spotify pitch. I think this is a game changer. Fascinating company. I'm hanging on now. I might sell my options probably soon. So someone asked me about that, just because I'm up huge on them, and then I'm just going to hold on my stock position. I don't like options anyway. They stress me out. Spotify offering a TikTok-like feature where you can upload. I like that. That's really interesting. Yeah. And actually, more and more, someone just said this. I think the other biggest thing is video for podcasts, but really like the discovery of podcasts. This is, Tesla Daily, one of my buddies, Rob Maurer. I had told him forever he had the best podcast on Tesla for this daily news. And then it's like, dude, I'm like, you're not on YouTube. It's the biggest podcast platform. Why don't you go on YouTube? You'll crush it. And he's been crushing it on YouTube. And so, yeah, kind of lost my train of thought there. And so my point being there is YouTube allowed him to get discovered and grow his base way more than like the podcast world was. And I think the podcast world isn't doing justice to creators because it's unable to get them discovered the way that YouTube is, and the way that other social media platforms, Instagram, TikTok, really allow you to go viral and get discovered. There's no viral podcast. And I think that is really holding back the industry as well. And it's hard to monetize your podcast. Videos, YouTube's way easier. And so these are all challenges I see Spotify leading and solving. Very excited about this potential. Anyway, that kind of wraps up my thing. Spotify going not just into the dopest podcast, but video. Anyway, I'll see y'all next time. Thanks for tuning into the live stream. Yeah, we'll see what happens. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Peace out.